My name is Lynn Woodward, and I currently am an editor and video host at Kelley Blue Book. I've been writing in the automotive space for just a couple of years now. I love it. I grew up loving driving and cars, only I never had anybody to talk to about it. And so now I'm thrilled that I have so many people to talk to about it, including you guys.
All right. You guys, me and Frank.
Yes, you and Frank and all of the people in the air out there.
I was going to have you appraise a car, but I honestly think that there's really nothing to appraise. And I know that's one of your shticks, right? You go, I'm not going to make your car more valuable or anything like that, right?
Oh,
That's your little
I don't
Instagram
do
title.
that. Yeah, like, okay, so that part, everyone thinks that that's what, if you work at Kelley Blue Book, they're like, what's my car worth? Dude, I have no idea. That's not part of what I do. I review new sheet metal. So anything that's new on the market, a new car, like I just review it and talk about it. Mm-hmm. But I can't tell you what your 10-year-old jalopy, Accord is worth.
25-year-old jalopy.
Or 25. I don't know. That's probably worth more than the 10-year-old one because it's probably just a better car. But yeah, that's the funny thing about Kelley Blue Book is everyone just assumes that it's only about valuation. Mm-hmm. We have this whole other aspect that is editorial. So we write articles about cars, we do expert reviews about cars, and we also shoot video about cars. So we have a massive collection of YouTube videos on our YouTube channel. And we also on our website, good luck finding them. I can't even find. My mom asked me, she's like, how do I find your videos on Kelley Blue Book? And I'm like, I don't know, Mom, go to the YouTube channel. And so she's like, okay, I'll do that instead. But yeah, it's really, it's pretty cool. We have a huge editorial team. There are, I think, 12 of us. And there's a lot more to Kelley Blue Book than even what I thought. Because when I first heard that they had an editorial, I'm like, what? I thought you just go and see how much a car's worth. Cox Automotive, is owned by Cox Media, and these are like huge corporations. And so they own like a ton of, they own dealer.com, they own Auto Trader, they own like so many things. And so all of these, the good part of all of that is all of these entities are kind of like woven in together. So we can, if somebody likes a car, they can go immediately to a dealer and get a great deal on a car.
Right.
That's not part of what I do. I just talk about what it is and what my expert feelings on it are. Allegedly.
All right. Allegedly. Well, obviously you're doing this for a living, so expert seems to come in. That's appropriate.
Yeah, we'll use it in air quotes. Sure.
Okay.
No, listen, I think the other interesting thing about this line of work, especially as a journalist, mm-hmm. is there is a massive amount of subjectivity that goes along with it. Of course. What one person thinks is an attractive car, the other person does not. And so it is very interesting, and a lot of it is based on opinion. But then empirically, there are some things that are just good or not good.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Okay, I agree. Before we go into those details, This is an origin story podcast. Okay, so really the most important thing is to find out where you came from, because your story is really cool. It's so outside the norm.
It really is.
Yeah, so that's really kind of what we're going to be doing here is we're going to start right from the very beginning. You're not from California.
No, I'm not. I was born in New York City, which in and of itself I think is a bit of an anomaly. I think most people, when you say, "Oh, born in New York," they're like, "Oh, upstate." No, I was born in Manhattan. I was born at Beth Israel Hospital, which is in Midtown, and I did not live there for very long. My mom, this was back in the early 70s. I'm definitely dating myself now, but my mom was a single mom, and she had 2 kids, and she was a dancer on Broadway for a long time.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But, she did not want to raise children in New York City by herself. At that time, it was just a mess. You couldn't even walk through Times Square without the idea of getting mugged. And so she knew one person in Los Angeles and thought, okay, well, the sun sounds nice. And I went there once and sure, let's try that. So loaded us up in a car. I think I was 3 years old and moved to LA. And I've lived in LA ever since. So I had one quick stint up in the Bay Area for about 11 years, but I've always been in my heart a Californian and in my heart of hearts an Angelino.
Got it. Yeah, I like how you said quick stint, 11-year quick stint.
It felt,
in the Bay Area.
God, it felt like an eternity. It's freaking cold in San
really
Francisco.
cold in San Francisco.
Sucked. And as someone who grew up in the San Fernando Valley, which some people believe is the armpit of the world, I love how hot it gets here and how like it's just hot. Like, let's face it. But I love it.
The armpit of the world? Really?
Well, just heat, like I think weather-wise.
I've got a different city that I think is the armpit of the world.
Oh, what is it?
There's two,
Really?
actually. Both armpits, left or right. Choose which one.
You need two.
Yeah, Bakersfield and Fresno.
Oh. All right. Well, maybe LA is more like the belly button.
Maybe.
But I think a lot of people are not accustomed to that weather. Hence, everyone who's cool lives on the west side or down at the beach. And I'm just like, nope, I'll take the hot, steamy valley.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Burbank. Yeah, it was a pretty normal, not normal childhood.
Okay, so let's talk about the normal, not normal childhood, because you've got a mother that was on Broadway.
Yes.
And you kind of followed, not necessarily in their footsteps, but close.
No, I mean, if she had had it her way, I would have followed directly in her footsteps. I think she was a dancer. She came out of the womb wanting to be a dancer. And so I was in ballet classes sooner than as soon as I could walk. But I also, because, it's Los Angeles and there's the movie business here. And, someone on the street was like, your kids are cute. You should put them in commercials. And she was like, oh, okay. I think at that point for her, like she was a professional dancer. And in Los Angeles, there just is not the work that there is in New York City. There is no Broadway here.
Right.
So she was teaching, but things were really tough. And, Dad wasn't really contributing all that much. So we got an agent, and my brother and I started doing commercials and television work, I think from the time I was about 7 until I was about 13 or 14.
Okay.
And all of those characters that that we kind of grew up with in the 80s, half of them are dead now, I think.
Yeah, not
sadly.
a good, yeah.
I worked with Corey Feldman all the time.
Really?
He played my little brother like twice, like 2 or 3 times. So yeah, all of those people, they were people who I kind of worked with, but I had those, like my mom remarried when I was 7, and I had those parents who were very, very down to earth. Mm-hmm. They did not put up with a whole lot of like, oh, you can do whatever you want. It was very, I was very professional. But yeah, I did tons of commercials, and I never went to rehab, which is probably pretty amazing. I was always very grounded because my parents would put up with absolutely zero. So yeah, it was fun. I loved it. People were ruthless at school. So it wasn't, I just feel like, okay, at 7, like I pretty much turned into an adult.
Wow.
With a job.
Yeah, that sounds like it. Okay.
So I'm making up for it now.
Oh, really? Is that what it is?
Well, maybe a little bit. I don't know.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
I love to bring in the fun aspect. I mean, really, that's what I always kind of come back to this. I know I sound like a broken record, but we do this stuff for fun.
Yeah.
Cars are fun, and that's why we drive them. That's why I drive a car with 3 pedals, because I want to have fun.
Yep.
It may not be as fast. I clocked my 0 to 60 time. Did not even come close to the car's manufacturer claim or whatever any publication is able to get.
Nice.
But it's still fun.
I have a vintage car that doesn't even go to 60.
Really? It won't get to 60?
It does, but I don't like to push it that hard. I mean, if I'm driving it on the freeway, I'll pretty much cap it at like 55, 57.
Got it.
I don't like to, it's 4-speed, 60. I have a 66 Datsun 1600 Roadster.
Yeah.
So, until I get a 5-speed transmission to put on it, we'll stay around 55.
Got it. It makes sense. We're going to come back to that car.
Okay, cool.
It's a very interesting car. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's good.
Roadsters are kind of my thing.
Nice.
So we'll talk about that.
We're going to be good friends.
Yeah, possibly.
Nice.
I had an S2000, so.
Oh, that's
yes.
Okay. That's the same family.
Burbank is the home for Bob's Big Boy.
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, so it's so funny. When I was in high school, after football games, every Friday night, like that's where we would go. But at that point, so they had car shows there back in the early days, like I guess I'm assuming the 50s and 60s. But when I was in high school in the 80s, they had stopped doing that altogether.
Really?
Yeah. So there was a huge hiatus that they took on that. I don't know when they reinstated it. I think it was sometime in the 90s. But yeah, every Friday night, Bob's has this sort of retro car show, and it's just all of these people kind of fill up, and there's a lot of regulars there. So if you go there like a couple of weeks in a row, you can tell like who's there all the time. The amazing thing about that car show, because my best friend used to live right down the street, I went to it once. This is before I even got into automotive writing. I was cruising around. I think I was going to the theater right across the street at the Falcon Theater. And I was walking around and I saw this red sports car kind of tucked into the corner, and it was a convertible, and I was just drawn to it, and I walked over to it and I looked at this thing and I was like, what is this? And I finally saw the badge, and it was a Datsun, and it was a 1600. I was so blown away by how just beautiful I thought this car was. I'd never seen it before. My first car was a Datsun. It was a beat up 77 B210. So it was nothing even remotely like pretty or sexy or flashy or anything like that. It was just car. But this, I was like, that's a Datsun? Like, what the? Like, I was just amazed by it. And I never quite got that car out of my head. I kept thinking about it. And then fast forward 7 years, I got into this business, and people were like, you should get a second car. And I'm like, oh, only rich people get second cars. Like, what? And that was at the top of the list. That and a CJ7. And I just really couldn't justify that because I don't have the money to fix it. But yeah, the Datsun, and that's actually a really an interesting story how I found that particular car as well. But yeah, Bob's Big Boy is where it all happened.
Right. So we'll talk about the story of how you got into that car, literally how you got into it and drove it away, because I think those stories are wonderful. But before we do that, you grew up in Burbank. There's this whole kind of car culture that you're exposed to, and you're paying attention, it sounds like, because you kind of have this already ingrained. Your parents aren't car people? They didn't really care?
My biological father was a car person.
Okay.
And my parents were not together from a very early age, and he eventually moved from New York to Los Angeles as well. And I mean, I can remember my earliest memories of cars were his cars. He had 2 Porsche Speedsters, which I just thought were, I mean, as a little girl, I was just so enthralled with how simple they were, but how beautiful they were. And they were elegant, and they were lovely, but they were these little like fantasy machines. And so the first one that he had, it was black, and I don't even remember what it was. Maybe it was a 1600. It was it was a lovely, lovely car. So the first one was that kind of eggshell, like that really pale eggshell, ivory white that Porsche does, or that they did on the 356. And that one, it blew up in a fire.
Ouch.
So his house, unfortunately, had an electrical fire, and it destroyed the car, which was, again, I was so heartbroken because that was like, it was just like this little fantasy of mine. I loved being in that car. And so he replaced it and bought a second one that was black. So black, it was a black paint, like black interior. It was, again, it was gorgeous. He never let me drive it. I never got to get anywhere near it. And I was like, well, it's my prom. Like, can't I take that? And no, absolutely not. But I absolutely adored that car. And he had, I think he had a VW Squareback. It was one of those blue, like a big blue one that we called it the Postman, because it just looked like like the USPS, like drove that around. He had a 450 SL, a vintage one that was just was like beautiful midnight blue with this really just like sumptuous white interior. And these were they captured my imagination, and I have always loved driving. I loved and this is going to sound like such a cliche, but just the ability to just go and just be away, and to just drive, and to be free of wherever it was that you were. That's how I was first introduced to cars and fell in love with them.
So you mean, what do you mean that's how you were first introduced to cars? You were taking road trips as a kid, or?
Well, it's funny. We didn't even really take that many road trips. I mean, we would just drive all over the valley, and I would go to auditions, and I would go to dance class, and, I was just in a car a lot, but there was something about the movement of it that just was very intriguing to me. My mom drove a 1977 Corolla, the SR5. It was the hatchback, and it was 5-speed. It was a manual transmission, and from a very early age, I used to make her. I was like, "Teach me when to shift. Like, show me how to do it." And at first, she would have to say, "Okay, now," and she would tell me, and then all of a sudden, like, I would start to hear the engine, and when I knew when she was, pushing, depressing the clutch, and I knew, like, so I just started learning how to do all of those things, and I was like, you have to teach me how to drive, and I think I was 14 years old, and so it's always been something that I have really had an affinity for, but interestingly enough, like, I never had anybody to talk to about it. I always noticed cars. I always noticed cars on the freeway when I was driving, things that looked interesting to me. But it was never something that I had sort of articulated openly.
You have a master's degree in creative writing, and that takes some effort. No dummy's just going to go out and get a master's degree in creative writing. You actually have to be good at it. You didn't go into automotive because you didn't know that this world existed, or?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's very accurate. When I was a senior in college, I started taking, maybe I was a junior in college. Yeah, I started taking poetry classes and started writing. I had been writing poetry, that kind of, oh, woe is me, like teenage girl poetry when you're 14 years old.
Totally. I wrote that all the time.
Right? Who doesn't? But, when I was a senior, I started taking poetry classes, and then I'm like, God, what are you going to do? Be a poet? Like, that's not a job. Like, that's crazy. So then I took a short story writing class. I kind of thought, after I stopped acting and stopped doing all of the, the dancing and the singing, because that was all stuff that my mom really wanted for me, and it wasn't something that I really loved enough. You're going to do that? Jesus, you better do that really seriously, because it is a quick career, and then by the time you're 35, you're done.
Right.
So I thought, well, I love being creative. I love telling stories. I loved writing. And so I just started taking those classes in college. But by the time I was getting ready to graduate, I just felt like I'd only taken a semester of a short story class. And I'm like, I just didn't know what kind of writer I wanted to be. And nothing was clicking, nothing was connecting. And so I thought, well, I just have to keep going to school. I'm obviously not done yet. So I applied to a bunch of graduate schools, and those writing programs are really, really, really hard to get into. I didn't get in anywhere my first year, so I tried again, and I had to take a year off, and then I eventually got into Mills College, which is up in Oakland. And I thought, okay, well, short story writing, sure, that's okay. That sounds sort of like my bag, I guess. I don't know. And I was there for 2 years. And after that, maybe it was that kind of quarter century crisis. I was 25, and I just was like, I still don't know what the F to do with my life. Like, this is so weird and disorienting. And a family friend was like, hey, you'd be great in advertising. And so he introduced me to some people, and I ended up getting a job at McCann Erickson on a horrible AT&T account. This is when cell phones first came out, and everyone was like, look at this brick Nokia. It's amazing. And I was kind of miserable there. And then it sort of snowballed. I ended up getting a job at this amazing creative agency called Goodby Silverstein and Partners, which has won every award there is to win. And I worked on amazing accounts like Nike and E-Trade and Vail Resort. And I got to travel around and see a bunch of stuff. And it's so funny because one of the guys there he was a copywriter. I was just an account person. I wasn't even doing writing as a business. I was the suit who was in the meetings going, oh yes, Mr. Client, we'll make your logo 10% bigger, no problem. But this creative guy, his name is Steve Dildarian, and he actually was a writer, and he had a show on HBO called The Life and Times of Tim. What a great guy he was. And he's like, dude, here's this thing called Final Draft. Go write a movie. And I was like, a movie? And I'd been in the business from when I was a kid, and it just had never connected with me that maybe that was something that I could write because I had known it so well. So that was, I think, at the end of the 90s, and I started writing on my own, and boy, I wrote some dog scripts. I'll go back and look at them now, and they were just terrible. But it kind of started a slow burn inside of me, and I thought, all right, this is what I want to do. And I eventually moved back to Los Angeles. I was living in San Francisco at the time. Moved back to LA, still in advertising, trying to make money. You got to pay your bills.
Sure.
And then I got laid off at one point, and I think it was, again, one of those like crossroads in your life. I turned 40, and I was like, all right, if I don't do this now, I am never going to do this. And I left my job, and I said, I'm just going to be a writer full time. And man, you've never eaten more cans of refried beans for dinner. Like, as a beginning writer. And it was super scary. But it ended me up here where I am. And it's funny, it was because I'd had a little bit of success writing for an animated kids show that was just atrocious. And then I wrote a couple of television movies that were produced, but still trying to get an agent, trying to find some kind of traction. It's still so hard in this business unless you're like, my uncle runs Warner Brothers.
Sure.
So I was taking part-time project management jobs. Still in advertising and marketing. And I had been offered this job as a project manager working at the Enthusiast Network. And I was like, what the fuck is that? Like, I even looked it up online. I'm like, what do they do? Like, I have no idea what they do. And I walked in there on my first day. I had only interviewed on the phone with them. I never even met them in person. And this wonderful woman who I worked with, she was like, oh, we're doing this activation for Infinity at this thing called the Concours d'Elegance, and it's going to be awesome, and we're so happy to have you on board. And I was like, okay. Like, what? I don't know what that is. Yeah. But it was a long-term assignment, and I was there for, had been there for 5 months. And of course, now I know the Enthusiast Network is now the Motor Trend Group, and they published Motor Trend and Automobile and Roadkill and, all of these like amazing, like Truck Trend, all these amazing magazines. And I was just surrounded by car people.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, where have you guys been hiding? Like, this is amazing. And it took me a while to get to know people, but once I did, and I was exposed to that world, because again, I wasn't like, I've read Car and Driver since I was 6. I see those magazines at the dentist, but I would never pick them up. I mean, I just never kind of connected with it until then. And it's almost like it was just like the planets aligned perfectly, and the sun just sort of came out, and it was like, that moment where you just think, oh, yeah, this makes total sense. And it was our good friend, mutual friend, Alana Scher, who I had already left, and because it was a temporary assignment, and she got promoted to be the editor-in-chief of Roadkill magazine. And I was just said, oh, dude, congratulations, that's awesome. And she's like, would you ever be interested in writing about cars? And I was like, yeah. And that was it. She's like, okay, well, send me a bunch of pitches. And I started writing for Roadkill. I started writing for Automobile. I started writing for Truck Trend. And then it just blew up from there. And like I said, I think I had my first story published 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
And now it's just, it's become a thing.
You mentioned Car and Driver and Road and Track, and that's kind of interesting to me because you're a creative writer, and that's what you do. It's what you studied. And my assumption is if you're a creative writer, you're probably going to read a lot, and you could be a voracious reader, right? Were you a voracious reader? I
definitely read. So obviously, I did not read car magazines. I'm more of a novel reader. It's so funny because now that I commute, my office is about 60 miles away from where I actually live.
Wow.
And I don't physically have to be there every day because I'm shooting a lot and because I travel quite a bit. But I have gotten very accustomed to listening to audiobooks. And I am actually now going through the entire series of Harry Bosch novels written by Michael Connelly. They're all these like LA-based like murder mysteries. By the way, if you haven't watched the series, I'm totally plugging it now for Amazon. Like, it's one of the best shows, if not the best show on television. It's unbelievably well made.
Okay.
So I'm voracious in spurts. I love magazines because they're sort of short articles. I can sometimes tend to have like a short attention span, but more novels than anything else if I was reading anything.
Right.
Frankenstein is my favorite novel. Oh, he just looked at me.
He's very, very attentive to that name, yeah. His name is actually Frank, but, I give him a couple of different titles just because, why not? Life's short.
You need everyone needs a nickname or two.
Yeah, Frankenstein, Frankenfurter, sausage, depending on how much he eats. Sometimes he looks like a sausage when he's got his little wobble, when he needs to go to the bathroom 32 times in one walk.
Yes.
But, it is what it is. It's just the life of
He's
having a dog.
Sending P-mail. Come on.
You had this infatuation with cars. I mean, you're talking about these cars like your Toyota SR5, like the 356s, the Speedsters, the 1600. I mean, you're really mentioning some specifics here. Did you know those specifics when you were a kid, or did you learn about the specificity of what you're talking about now when you were older?
I learned about the specificity when I was older. I just knew when anything was driving by me at any given time, from when I was a very young age to now, I saw things and I knew what I liked. Like, I would see something and I'd be like, I wonder why that's shaped like that. Or, oh, that's a great car. Or why is it that Toyota has such awful colors? Or why, there were things that I noticed about cars. And I loved driving. And I will always, even to this day, be the first person to raise their hand if someone says, who's going to drive? I'll drive. Maybe it's the control freak in me, but there's just something that I love about the mechanics and the process of driving and what it does and what it affords us or humanity in general. To me, I was a young person who grew up very young, and for me it was definitely a means with which I could, if I could drive somewhere by myself, then I was asserting my individualness. I was being in control of what I wanted to do. If someone wants to carpool to a party, 9 times out of 10, I'll say no. Because I want to leave when I want to leave, and I'm just going to get in my car and go. But, I'm so happy. I will happily take road trips by myself. And it's just, I have always not necessarily had an affinity or even an understanding of the mechanics of a car. I don't know that. I mean, I'm just starting to learn on my own Datsun. But getting under a hood and wrenching a car is not where I feel like let's call it my expertise lies. But I think the human connection to a car, which is, let's face it, most of the people who are buying a car are not going to go and change their own oil. I don't think they even can anymore because they're like, where the fuck is the oil thing? No one can find it. It's all a computer anyway. But for me, it was more about that visceral, personal response that you have to a car, especially in LA, because car was so intrinsically wrapped up into kind of who you were. Like, one of the first questions you asked when you were in high school, what kind of car do you drive?
Yeah.
It was such a thing at least for me growing up. And that I think was the main thrust and the main interest for me was more about the stories of the car, less about the, mechanical, how does it handle? What's the turn-in rate on this? It was a different understanding. And now I'm learning all of those other things and learning what, how the suspension works and all of those kinds of things. And now that is all very interesting to me, to be able to get in two separate cars and be able to compare them and say, oh yeah, I can feel the difference.
Now, was it the story of the car?
Now it's the story of the car. I mean, once I started getting involved in it and writing about it, one of the first assignments that I had, Alana had this great idea for Roadkill magazine. She wanted to review cars and review restaurants. So I pitched her like, okay, I want to take this car to this restaurant. And they generally had to be connected in some way. So the very first car that I reviewed was a Valiant.
Okay.
And a friend of mine had completely restored this car, and the whole interior was this kind of red velour. It was just this amazing, like it was like a red velvet cake. You kind of cut into it, and it was just like this gorgeous red. And so I took him to the Velvet Margarita in Hollywood.
Okay.
And we parked the car out front, and he's Mexican American. And so we had this awesome conversation about his car and how it was his grandfather's. And how it had been passed down to him, and it was just all beat up, and he completely restored it, and now he can't wait to give it to his son. And we're sitting like basically in this red velvet, interior of this restaurant eating, guacamole. And it was just, it was really great. And so to me, it kind of became about the cars and people's connections to their cars. And I love writing about vintage cars and old cars. Those stories are so fascinating to me. And then it's a little bit of both, you learn about, so I did a story about the Di Tommaso, the Mangusta, and you find out like, oh, he was a real schmuck and nobody liked him. But you kind of get both layers of it at that point. And then you learn that, oh, that was a real shit pile of a car, but whoa, it was gorgeous looking. And here's what it led to. And here's how it all kind of unfolded. And it's like peeling away the layers of an onion.
Now, what do you prefer to do in terms of writing? Do you prefer the original stories that you wrote that were kind of like both the car and the human, or now a little bit more kind of objective maybe and subjective in so many different regards? For
me, I love the combination of the two. Variety is the spice of life. Let's throw in a cliche.
Sure.
I think that doing just one thing would probably get a little monotonous. So being able to talk about an old, like a vintage car or an event or a person who's associated with that car, to me keeps things really fresh and interesting. But then I also love writing about new cars. I mean, a lot of some of my favorite stories that I've done were talking about the car and having a person sort of associated with the car. I did a cover story for Truck Trend magazine about the Power Wagon and had an opportunity to go wheeling with Nina Barlow, who is one of the best, if not the best, female off-road instructors in the United States. And really, it was so interesting to learn about the Power Wagon, which is a very kick-ass truck, but also to hear her experience with the car and why she loves the car so much and what it does for her and her business. And those are the things that kind of that fascinate me.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's you that posted a picture that basically had a description of like, it was kind of like a jab, I think, at someone who wasn't very happy with you being at a particular spot.
Yeah.
The reason I asked this question is I really want people to know, what it takes to get to the point. Like Johnny Lieberman, when he's been here, when Ilana's been here. It takes so much work, so much effort, so much eating of refried beans or whatever kind of beans you've got.
Yeah.
It's just like starting a business. This business that I'm sitting in here, which is separate, obviously, from the podcast, I'm on my 4th year and I feel like I'm just starting. Really, I want people to understand is that it takes so long and it takes so much effort. So can you expand on that story a little bit? Kind of give us some insight as to the difficulties that you had?
Absolutely. And I feel like there's an extra added bonus of being a woman in a very male-dominated industry that made it even more difficult. I think when you get the feeling like people don't take you seriously or they see you in one light Well, she was just a project manager who worked on that Infinity thing. And what does she know about anything? I think it's really hard to change somebody's mind about who you are and what you do. I think this applies in any genre of writing. I think there are very few people out there who are just sort of naturally gifted as a writer in this way that some professional athletes are. It is something that takes a lot of time, that takes a lot of practice, that you have to just do constantly. And I was told once, look, if there's anything else out there that's interesting to you as a business, go do it. Because this is going to be so hard and tear you down to basically to the studs that you better have to do it. And for me, it's that way. I am not right if I'm not writing. And so my goal was just to always be a writer. And there was an element to me that I almost didn't even care what it was that I was writing. I just needed to write. As it turns out, I am very fortunate because I get to write about something that I love. And there's that element to it that makes it so much easier to do when I'm sitting and staring at a blank page and I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to say about the Mazda 3? But there's literally, it's just that discipline and not listening to those people who are like, why is she here?
Yeah.
Why am I here? Because
to take your job.
Because I want to be here, because I feel like I may not have earned it yet, but I am working my ass off in order to earn it. And I've paid a lot of dues in my life. And maybe it's not all in car magazines, but I feel like the life experience that I have and what I bring to the table is unique. And that means I'm going to tell a very unique story. And that is interesting to me. And I feel like it's that way with a lot of people. I'm sure that there were people who hired me who were like, oh, she's, cute blonde chick who, well, yeah, sure, why not? I don't care how I get in the door. There's no easy path, but once I get in the door, I'm going to put up or shut up, because you really have to. Like, you can't just phone it in. This is not a phoning it in kind of business. And yeah, from the outside, it looks like, oh my God, that's the best job in the world. And you guys just look like you have so much fun. It's a lot of hard work. The traveling is it's great, but it's tough. Try flying to Europe for 48 hours and driving a really expensive car once you land and you haven't slept all night.
Right.
I did that once. I had to go. I was doing a story in England. I was doing a couple of stories, one for Automobile and one for Truck Trend. And I didn't fly out first class. I was freelance. So I was doing this all on my own dime. I did it with frequent flyer miles, and I flew out there and I didn't sleep maybe but an hour. I landed. I got picked up by the folks at Aston Martin. They drove me an hour and a half up to Gaydon, and I got in a $300,000 car. And I hadn't slept in like 20 hours. I had to drive it 3 hours. And I was like, and I'm on the other side of the road. I'm on the other side of the car. And I'm like, oh God, just don't crash. Just don't crash. Just don't crash. And, it's exhausting. But again, you just remind yourself, oh, but I love doing this. And it's worth it to me to make that sacrifice and pull over on the side of the road and fall asleep in a Vanquish.
Yeah. It's not a bad place to sleep.
It's not a bad place to sleep. It's just, I take driving manufacturers' cars as an awesome responsibility. I know there are those people out there who are like, oh, it's, drive it like you stole it. And I've never been that kind of person. So for me, it's, I take that responsibility very seriously. But, even now, I still have to work really hard at what I do. I don't have the breadth or depth of knowledge that a lot of my coworkers have. I have not been in this business for 15 years. I don't remember what the second gen, Honda Accord was like. I have to go in and figure that out. And then good luck on the internet trying to find corroborating evidence of anything, because you get one story over here and one story over here, and so you get some very conflicting things. But it has truly been an education. I mean, and it's as though I have gone back to graduate school again. And yeah, it takes what probably takes someone else 90 minutes to write. Like when I first got started, it would take me 2 or 3 days. But I had to do it, and I wasn't getting paid a whole lot of money for that. You figure 2 or 3 days for one story. Oh, that's not a very good return on your investment, but you did it.
Right.
Before I got that job at Motor Trend, I was literally on food stamps, and it was super humbling.
Yeah.
But I was like, you know what? This is what I want to do, and this is all I want to do, and there is no plan B.
So what was the first article that you wrote? Do you remember it?
That was the Valiant going to the Velvet Margarita for Roadkill magazine.
That's one hell of an article to write as your first one.
Right. I actually want to go back and look at the raw copy now and see just how atrocious it was and just how much Alana had to edit me. But the second story that I wrote was for Automobile magazine. I kind of knew the lay of the land. I knew that that the magazine's got long-term loaners, and a very good friend of mine named Derek Powell, who is another automotive enthusiast and writer. He told me about a track day up at Buttonwillow, and he's like, "Oh, Audi puts this thing on, and it's like a performance racing school, and you should do it. Like, start improving your driving skills." And I was like, "Okay, great, that sounds awesome." And he's like, "The only thing is you have to bring your own car." And I'm like, I was driving a Buick Enclave at the time. I'm like, I can't track this thing. It's like a tank with a piano on top of it. What? And he's like, "Yeah, you need to get another car." And I'm like, "How the fuck am I going to get a car?" And I just thought, you know what? I'll reach out to these guys who have long-term loaners. And I pitched the idea to Automobile, and I just said, "Hey, I'm doing a track day. Is there a car that you would like that's in your long-term fleet that you would like tracked?" And I got a note back that was like, "Oh yeah, we have a Golf Type R that that you should. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be a great story." And I was like, "Oh my god! Like I can't believe I just bamboozled the shit out of these people to let me drive this car." And yeah, I drove it. I took it. I drove it. So my first story was the Valiant, and my second story was the Golf R for Automobile up at Buttonwillow. And man, that day, it was so fun. Like tracking that car was such a blast.
People underestimate how much fun you can have in a car.
Absolutely. But that the other thing is, and it was interesting because that was really my first time tracking a car, and I did not know what to expect. I love driving. I like to think I'm a pretty decent driver for someone who hasn't had formal training. It was a very zen experience because to me, it's not you think, it's, you're hopped up on adrenaline and it's this really whoa, rad, woohoo thing. For me, it was 100% the opposite. It was this very inward focused, very zen experience because there was nothing emotional about it. It was all mental because you have got to be that focused. And I get so distracted in real life. We all have, the phone and this thing that wants your attention and that boss who needs this. And it was one of those moments in life where you're just solidly focused on what is right in front of you and exactly what you're doing. And in those moments, it's so freeing because you're just there.
I agree. Except you and I are a little bit different because when I get into a car, I'm this psychopath that's I need to get the fastest time and go as fast as possible. And, it's not very, I think I come out zen because, especially if I have a good time, and I'm talking literally the time that I get off the clock.
Yeah.
That's what's important to me. But I'm also a little crazy and a little competitive.
Well, maybe that's the difference between men and women. I don't know. Or that might be, generalizing way too much. I've heard both from both genders. I know women who are just yeah, I'm going to just flog this thing around this track and it's just going to kick ass and it's going to be amazing. And then so I think whatever that experience is, it's definitely very singular, for everybody it's different. But for me, that is that kind of moment where it's just like you imagine a pitcher, like a big league pitcher. I love baseball. And you just imagine like when they're throwing that ball, everything just disappears and it's just tunnel vision.
The way that I usually do this is I thank the person that's sitting in front of me because, well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's always great to hear the perspective of different people and to hear people's struggles and how much they've been through to get to where they are. So thank you for sharing that and opening up here.
Absolutely.
I would like for you to take the opportunity to plug whatever it is that you want to plug, whether it be KBB or, if you're doing freelance work, I'm not really sure. So please take this opportunity.
Yeah. The job that I have at Kelley Blue Book, I think is a accumulation of all of the jobs I've ever had in my life, except maybe making bagel sandwiches at Noah's. But I would love it if people watched my videos, and if you like them, definitely make comments, maybe not about my hair or what I'm wearing like a lot of people do. But I love encouragement. I love to know how I could do better. But yeah, if you go to Kelley Blue Book's YouTube channel, you can check out my videos. You can check out Micah Musio's videos. We both together run the whole shebang there. So
cool.
Check us out.
All right. Well, you've heard it. Now go get to it. Okay.
Remember, nothing about my hair.